Hello and welcome to Lecture 2, Part 3. We are looking at the impact versus intent of CCSD's grading system. This is the last final lecture for this series, for this module, and the purpose of it is really to explore the two documents. So the first one obviously is the article, which we'll get into for the majority of the second half of the lecture, and then the first part of the lecture we'll talk a little bit about the Infinite Campus gradebook. And the reason why this came to be, it's kind of funny. I was looking for actual information on just grading and practices, and what I ended up finding was that the training manual answered questions about the expectations of grading policies and procedures. So as I started to read it and click around on things, I said, oh, this is interesting. It's kind of embedded in within the manual of how to. So I'm only going to go through the first part of it, some of the expectations that are very clear. You can go over this on your own if you've never looked at it, but it's kind of interesting what they recommend for us, the district, in regards to grading and all that sorts of stuff. So this is not really a handout. It is really kind of, I wanted to give you an opportunity to explore some of the frequently asked questions, and then what is suggested for people to do in order to achieve the highest balance in grading. So let's take a look at the first part. So the question for the first one that I have here, it says, since the CCSD report card reflects the student's mastery of grade level standards, how should teachers record grades in their grade book for students working on below grade level standards? Example, 5th grade student receives an 88% or meeting on an assessment based on 3rd grade standards. The recommendation is grades recorded in the grade book reflect the student's proficiency on grade level standards. Teachers can maintain records on non-grade level work, but this information should not be reflected in the letter grade recorded on the report card. The comment section of a progress report, the report card, should be used to offer further explanation when needed. So this is interesting because within a high school setting, obviously, oftentimes students are not at the level of mastery or proficiency when they come in. So it's almost like they're saying the first half of the school term, only the summative assessment should be reported, but then that gives it a imbalanced grading result. So you have to grade something, but it doesn't seem like it's a fairness if the student is not, it's non-academic work. Like I remember oftentimes having to teach students who are in the 6th grade at the 3rd grade level or 5th grade level, and that's where they were, and we work with the RTI coach, but I had to give them a grade. So it's like this recommendation only goes but so far. It kind of limits what you can do. And situations where you have where the student will stay at that level, but they're in an inclusive setting within your particular content area, you have to administer a grade for them. So it might mean changing the summatives to meet the recommendations. Next, it says here, the question was, should items recorded in the gradebook only reflect summative assessments measuring mastery of standards? Can assessments that reflect formative practice be included in the gradebook? And then they break it down. So remember, the previous lecture went over the balanced assessment system and then the 15 grade fixes. This highlights some of the discrepancies with that, with some of the challenges with integrating the balanced grading system completely. So it says grades recorded in the gradebook should reflect balanced formal and informal assessments. So that balance is determined by the balance system that I shared with you, and then and informal assessments of mastery towards the grade level standards and should be consistent across grade levels within the school. Category weights given to assignments can be used to emphasize summative assessments over formative assessments. And they give examples, but it says at the end, students should be given multiple opportunities to show mastery on grade level standards, and the grade book should be updated to reflect the most recent and accurate evidence of a student's true achievement level. So if we think about the quarters of a grading cycle, typically within a given progress report, you have maybe about 2 units, maybe 1 depending on how long they are. That means maybe 1 or 2 summative assessments, and the balance would be, I guess, a informal summative assessment that then weights some of the practice activities that you allow students to do, because you wouldn't be able to grade every single thing if it's going to be balanced. The balance would be maybe every 2 weeks you give them a informal summative assessment like a quiz or a mini project, and then the final formal summative assessment would then be what you will use the informal formatives, and then or some of the informal formatives or informal summatives along with a summative that maybe you break into every 2 weeks or twice within that quarter, because other than that you're not going to achieve the balance that you want. So the other issue with this is that if you're in a school that practices a inflated grading reporting where you have a minimum F, this skews everything, right? So the student may not necessarily have a 0. They start off with a 51 or 56%, however it is. And I came from a district that did that. And I had a student that did nothing the entire year. So I was often faced with the challenge of, technically, you know, if he did like 1 or 2 things, he's passing with a 70%, even though he didn't do anything. Why? Because of that minimum 0 or that minimum grade that we had to enter for a 0. So keep that in mind. And speaking of that, so although a lot of the recommendations within the manual for how to input your grades and also the balanced assessment system and the actual 15 grade fixes allude to, you know, great possibilities for students to achieve and demonstrate mastery on their report cards, there are a lot of diverse grading policies that actually penalize some students. So before we move on to that discussion, I wanted to actually bring in the video, sorry, that's the wrong one, that talks about the very things I'm discussing now. So let's just take a look. Excuse me, sorry about that. Let's take a look at this.
A few years ago, we migrated from a 100-point scale to a 5-point scale. The 5-point scale is pretty consistent. Usually when you hear about people talking about non-toxic grading practices, it's usually a 5-point scale, where a 0 is a 0. But it's got to be 0 on a 5-point scale, not a 0 on a 100-point scale.
We have more students working than ever before. We have dramatically more students who are non-language proficient. When they go home and they're confronted with homework, have real problems with it because there's just their life at home, social life, work life, personal life, or their language proficiency. And it's a different reality for our kids, so we can't keep grading the way we used to. It just doesn't add up anymore for a lot of students.
Once I started teaching and saw that students were apathetic and unengaged and basically figured out how to manipulate the system just to pass. If you fail a test, you get 50%. If you blow off an assignment, you get 50%. And students quickly realize that they only have to complete a few assignments per quarter to get that passing grade. So I wanted something that made them work from the get-go. And so with my policy of a points-based grading system, they had to get to a minimum of 100 points to get a D.
You know, an F is an F. It doesn't matter if it's 2% or 58%. They still failed. We're in the kid success business, not the gotcha business. And we want kids to not just graduate, that's the end game, but along the way to master these concepts.
Okay, so the cool thing about that video is it kind of summarizes the challenges with CCSD's grading policy, which is why I selected it, because I thought what better way to hear about the challenges of CCSD's grading policy than to hear from, experts who are challenged by the system overall. So we'll continue. But that article summarizes some of the new grading practices that some of the schools are putting into place, because they realize, like I was saying, the schools' policies and practices with grading are intended to complement the student, but sometimes they encourage definitely negative academic behavior that tells the student, if I only do but so much, I can achieve, or that I have failed so much that I can't go anywhere. So the balance really, I think, has to be within a policy. So here are some things that the actual article reported on. So when it comes to academic success or failure, Clark County students aren't playing on a level field, meaning that some schools, here you see the reported, some schools have a certain grade policy while others do not. So here are the two schools that have failure results, and you saw that when you read it, which I thought was pretty interesting. But these differences create discrepancies within schools and within a Clark County School District overall. And the policies often give schools considerable leeway in setting grading policies. So that means that you go from one school to the next, and depending on the school and their grading policies, your kid might be really failing, but they're passing. And then they go to another school, they may be passing but really failing, which is interesting, because the varied scoring systems can have a real-world consequence. Real-world consequences meaning that a marginal student at a school using the minimum F policy might squeak by the graduate and graduate, while a student at a school using the traditional grading system would not. Why does this matter? Because they won't be proficient if they're squeaking by based on the minimum F policy, which is problematic because it doesn't even give you an opportunity to do balanced grading and really assess what the student knows. So you really have to work diligently to ensure that you have a plethora of summative and formative assessments that really show what the student is learning. Issues with grading variance include also the minimum F concept has been a divisive issue in the district for years, and it is at the center of a national debate. And it's other states as well that have the minimum zero. As I shared with you, the state that I came from, North Carolina, they too practice the same things, and it did create a lot of controversy regarding best practices for grading. And as you saw in the video, critics, including some teachers and parents and students, argue that the scheme enables students to game the system, which is the problem because they don't actually learn the skills. So as you're seeking efforts to increase the balance using some of the policies and procedures that they have in place, whatever your school's policies are for grading, let me go back. If you are trying to achieve balance within the practices that they suggest, your school's policies may actually get in the way of you achieving your desired goal, which is obviously a problem because if they have a minimum F, even if you're doing the best that you can to ensure that your grading system is balanced, it may have an imbalance. So I wanted to show you this really quickly just so you would see who's doing what. So making the grade, here's the solution here of transferring over traditional grading scale to the minimum F to the point grading system that they're recommending, and the details with that. And then there are only 3 schools currently that responded to the journal that are practicing the point scale. So you have point grading, you have Mojave, Rancho, and then Spring Valley, which I thought was pretty interesting. I wonder if any other schools are, and if your school is, please share that in the discussion. So rethinking the system, and this is a really short lecture, but moving from minimum F to points means maybe teaching students each thing that they do has an accumulation of points, and not in a way of penalty, just in a way of progress. Finding alternatives to representing true work of all students based in the balance that they kind of suggested within the balance assessment system, and then maximizing potential while decreasing negative stigmas associated with notions of failure. You know, students at the secondary and elementary level are really learning how to be scholars. They shouldn't be penalized for the learning process, but they should be held accountable for what they're doing. Okay, well, that concludes this lecture. If you have any questions or concerns, please feel free to voice them. The end of this module ends with a discussion that you will partake in about all of these slides and the information that you've learned. Have a great day.